Hi there, welcome back to the Community of Readers video blog. We're following the Old Testament readings for the Monkey Bar Challenge, and this week we're looking at the whole of the book of Ezekiel. This is called New Vision. Well, Ezekiel is the largest chunk of the Old Testament that we've looked at in one go. Ezekiel's prophesying around the time of the exile, so similar to Jeremiah, slightly later. But Ezekiel is different from Jeremiah, particularly in one crucial respect. He is a temple-minded priest, and they are more organised. Hence, we're looking at Ezekiel in one sitting. It's got an important unity to it. It's in two halves, perfectly symmetrical, and they reflect each other. The first half is a very strong judgment against Judah, and then the second talks of restoration. Now the first bit of Ezekiel can be hard to read because it's got these quite bizarre imageries, this sort of kaleidoscopic vision of bizarre beasts flying with wheels and eyes, but actually this makes surprising sense. Ezekiel describes a cloud and fire, which, as we know from other times, is really strongly symbolic of Yahweh's appearance on Mount Sinai. And then out of that fiery cloud comes this human-like creature, but with four heads, animal heads, and then wings and hooves and little hands underneath the wings. Now, this sounds really strange, but actually to anybody from the ancient Near East, this is a very recognisable image. It is a cherubim, a form of cherubim. The cherubim are mythical creatures across different religions in that region, and they were the bearers of kings. In particular, they would often be sitting with their wings touching and forming a throne. And this is true in the temple. In the temple in Jerusalem, two huge cherubim sat together with their wings touching. And so, this is the shocking bit of this vision. Here are cherubim flying within a cloud, which is like in Ezekiel's words, the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Yahweh himself. And there are wheels within wheels. They can move, and they are peppered with eyes as they can see everything. Now for the Israelites, Yahweh lived in his temple. It's hard for us to understand because we've had this sort of idea of an omnipresent God. You know, God is everywhere. But the Jews did not have that idea in the same way. They believed that in a very specific, real sense, Yahweh was in his temple. That was the real meeting point between heaven and earth. And the fact that Yahweh was there in Jerusalem meant that that promised land was safe and secure from its enemies, from invasion. So here in this vision, to see Yahweh moving somewhere else is utterly, utterly destroying the Israelites. It is a desperate, desolate vision of despair for the exiles in Babylon, and that's where Ezekiel is prophesying from. He went in the first wave of exiles. If you remember back, the boy king Jehoiachin gets exiled the first time Nebuchadnezzar invades, and his uncle Zedekiah is installed as a puppet king. And this is when Ezekiel is prophesying. So he's telling this prophecy to his fellow exiles. And it's just a terrible, painful moment. Now Jerusalem is left without their protector. And sure enough, Nebuchadnezzar invades once again, and this time the temple is destroyed. Ezekiel, in the second half of his prophecy, picks up the pathos of the people of Israel in the valley of dry bones. This vision of utter desolation, and yet there is hope as Yahweh calls those bones back to life. Though there has been exile, and though Yahweh has left, he will return. And so the last 8 chapters of Ezekiel are devoted in loving and a very typical priestly detail to a description of a new temple. And the very last line of the whole prophecy ends with the name of the temple, which is Yahweh is there. And in that prophecy, Yahweh actually moves in and locks himself in. And it's a vision, an imaginative vision, in a place of where everything has fallen. I mean, everything has gone. I mean, with hindsight, it's easy to know, well, okay, in the end they went back and they got to build a new temple and everything. But at that moment, it looked all over. And yet, Ezekiel dreamed and was not scared to imagine the restoration. It's a powerful piece of prophetic imagination. But there's something really interesting, I think, about the difference between Jeremiah and Ezekiel. These two massive prophets of Israelite faith, talking at a very similar time. The difference between them, I guess, is a bit similar to the difference between the Samuel King's account of the history and the Chronicles account of the history, which we talked about earlier in the year. The Samuel King's is often known as the Deuteronomic history, and the reason is it's much more interested in the Deuteronomic covenant, the bit from Deuteronomy, whereas Chronicles is written by priests and is much more interested in the Levitical side of things, or the history of the priests. And Ezekiel and Jeremiah are similar. Jeremiah is really interested in the law, less in the Levitical bit, but in the sense of the covenant with Yahweh. And I guess the focus of Jeremiah's ministry is to challenge the kings. And I guess his emphasis on restoration, where he prophesies about restoration, is really about Yahweh's steadfast love for his people. And in the end, that is why they will be restored. And yet Ezekiel's main critiques are against the mismanagement of the temple. And he is much more interested, any restoration is to do with the restoration of Yahweh's honour, rather than any kind of compassion that Yahweh might have on those with whom he once covenanted. So the sense of that binding love that the covenant brings between Yahweh and his people that you have in Jeremiah is not there in Ezekiel, where it is the proper regulation in the temple that matters in this vision of restoration. And this is really important because in the way, I guess you can say there's kind of these two types of Israelite faith at work. And we have to be careful not to overplay this, because there's enough judgment in Jeremiah and enough tender tones in Ezekiel to, it's not totally clear cut, but they're there. There are two types of Israelite faith, and you get that in different ways all the way through the Old Testament. And after the exile, it's the priestly tradition that gets stronger and that leads Israelite faith to become much more about defining who is clean and who is unclean, who is in and who is out. And that spelled a challenge for a people and a faith trying to reinvent itself in a new world. But Ezekiel is a powerful work of prophetic imagination, and it challenges us. It challenges us, any of us who are facing change, the ability to take that seriously, to fully enter into the pain of a change, and then to imagine the possibilities. Good, strong leadership matters. But the dream, the nature of the vision, is crucial, because the vision will shape the future, for good or ill.